Hey everyone, welcome back. Last week we were talking about floor craft, and I pointed out how important it is for followers to really understand the alignment of their steps when you're dancing in a social environment in a line of dance. So I thought today I would focus specifically on that topic of how to know whether you're aligning correctly for your steps as a follower specifically. Let's talk about first how to decide how big your steps should be. Now, I am in flats today, so I'm going to be showing everything in flats, but most of what I'm talking about will be applicable in heels as well. Although, if you want me to do a separate video just for those of you who are wearing heels, let me know. I can do that. So let's say that I am standing here prepared to go back. When I am invited to step back, how do I know whether my steps should be here, here, here? So first of all, everybody's going to have a little bit of a different step size based on their anatomy and their dimensions. So it's one of your responsibilities as a dancer is to understand what is your normal default range. So when I'm thinking for myself, I am starting with being on my axis, and then when I'm ready to go back, the first thing that I do is I actually slightly go forward. And the reason is that from your standing foot, you should be able to push yourself back. That's one of the first sort of requirements as a tango dancer to be walking back, is that you don't want to be walking back like this. You want to be actually be able to push off the floor. And in order to do that, in this position, I can't really push off the floor. If I push, it's going to look like this because the direction of the energy is that way. But if I lean slightly to where the weight of my foot is in my ball mount, now I can actually push to go back. So that's kind of the starting point. And then from here, when I extend my leg, what I'm looking for is a very gentle line that comes from my head all the way through my leg. And my particular step for my body right now, I'm actually showing you, this is my natural step. So from here, if I wanted to make a step, even without doing any movement, if I go back on this foot, I'll be able to transfer my weight without any difficulty. You see that? If I go a little bit further, let's just say I go to this point here. When I go back, now I can't really transfer my weight anymore. I'm a little bit too far. So if you as a follower have found yourself in places like when you're going into a cross, for example, and you're about to take the cross, but you're like, oh, I can't, there's too much weight in the front leg. Why is that happening? A lot of times because the step before that was a little long for you. So that sensation where you can't quite gather yourself on the back step because there's too much weight in the front, is a sign that your steps are too big for your specific size. So when we're first measuring this distance, it should be so easy to reach your axis without any work at all that it should feel very natural. So if I were to just want to walk without any idea of dancing, this would be my step. So if you see here, I'm able to walk back, and the size of my step is basically what I was showing. Now again, it's not this where I'm falling in the heel. I'm slightly forward. I'm in my ball mount here so that I can actually push off the foot. Okay? Now in tango, we don't just step like this. There's a little bit of travel involved when we get the energy from the leader. And this is where the front leg is going to be sort of like your gas pedal in this scenario, because depending on how much energy is given to you, you align yourself for the step, and then this leg will push off to the degree that you sense how much you need to go. So it might be this much, or it might be this much. So see how I'm using my front leg to really push myself back. So I'm not just bringing my foot here and transferring weight. I'm aligning, and then I'm pushing. Now, once you are playing with that idea of really walking and extending your foot, it's really going to be important that you keep the integrity of your position slightly to the front, so that as I'm stepping and I'm traveling back, I'm constantly pushing off the floor. You see, I'm slightly forward, and that allows me to keep pushing. Notice there's also a natural acceleration and deceleration that's happening in the step, right? This is part of the control that you want to have so that you can go as fast or as slow as the leader needs. And a lot of it is controlled through this sensation of the push out of the floor. Okay, so that's kind of the basics for the actual step, how to know how big the step should be. Now, when we're reaching back through the leg, I want to emphasize something that I do, and there's a little bit of controversy around it for some people. But when I reach my leg back, I really like to open the hip this way rather than keeping it closed this way. Okay? Now, I want you to see the difference from the back, why I think this actually works better. So I have this line here, and when we're thinking about walking back, and I was talking about this in my last tutorial, that as a follower, you really want to have a sense that you're tracking back exactly along the line, going straight behind yourself. When I reach my leg, and I don't open the hip, I want you to see what happens. So I go straight back, and now my leg is reaching. And do you see how my foot is starting to turn in? Okay? And it's crossing this line. Do you see that? So if I don't open my hip, a lot of times it will actually make me walk in this kind of a pigeon toe kind of walk. And it doesn't look as nice. It's also not as stable. Whereas if I'm starting here, and then from now I will do the same thing, except I'm going to open the hip and I'm going to reach back. Now you see the foot is really tracking more away from the line, and it actually looks better. So when I walk like this, it allows me to track more true to the line that I'm walking, okay? Now, the way to feel this in your body is I say, imagine that on the ball end of your foot to the front, kind of around the big toe, imagine that's where you have the ball of a pen or a pencil, and you're drawing with it. So right now I'm drawing on the floor like I'm in the sand, and I'm drawing something in the sand. So when I'm stepping back, I imagine that I'm drawing in the sand through that point on the foot. And you see how it really nicely aligns your leg right away, and it looks really elegant. Versus if I just close this off, it actually looks more strained. And another thing that you'll notice is when you reach out with your hip open like this, it's very easy to go down with this knee and keep reaching back. So this would be, sometimes you see the position of the follower in the closing pose. A lot of times it's something like this. And there, you're able to go down with this knee quite a bit if this hip is open. But if it's closed, then you can't really go back very far until you have to tap into your lower back range, which doesn't feel good. So when you're tracking back into your back step, reach with your big toe ball mount and allow the hip to open. It doesn't matter how big your step, whether it's like this or like this, you'll always feel a lot more stable when you come back onto it, because when I step back from this position, when my hip is open, I arrive on a foot that's slightly turned out, which makes it a bit more stable than if you arrive on a foot that's straight ahead. Okay, so that's kind of a few tips there. Now, how does this opening of the hip play out in forward steps? So once again, instead of thinking of me stepping forward and just allowing this hip to stay closed until I transfer, I actually will allow this hip to open as I step. So whenever I'm thinking about making my walk, my steps forward, especially more graceful, I'm thinking about really following through the back foot and articulating before I step forward. So if I were to exaggerate it here, this would be more of a stylized walk where I'm really using the back foot to press off. And you see here how my foot is slightly turned out. So again, when I push off, you see how it's slightly open here, and it allows me just the right amount of energy to arrive to my next step. Whereas if I don't do that, it's going to be a little bit wobbly here. I want you to even see with the hip shape here, this makes me feel more like I'm fighting for my balance. Whereas when I relax, it widens my base slightly and gives me more control. So the hip is going to be opening whether you go back or whether you go forward. The hip kind of elongating back and forward allows you that length of the step that we like to see in tango. And when you see that sort of gliding, panther-like energy, a lot of it is coming from the hips being able to articulate in your movement. Now, the last step I want to talk about is the side step, which a lot of times doesn't really get a lot of attention because it's just a side step. But one thing I will say is that it's really important as a follower for you to remember that as an object in space, when you're dancing with your partner, your goal is to realign with your partner and have your hips facing your partner's. It's kind of like there's a magnet on your hips, and the magnets are always wanting you to reconnect frontally with your partner. So if I am going away from my partner for a second because I am preparing for a pivot, this would be a moment of a lot of tension and energy built up that will send me around my partner. My next step is side step. And the most important thing in that side step is to establish the hips aligning with my partners exactly, or as closely as I can to the front. So if my partner is here, when I pivot in such a way that my side step is really truly side. What happens a lot of times, I'll show you from this angle, is that the follower will pivot, and then instead of going side, it'll be something like side or side, where it's not quite side, it's not quite forward, right? But if you think about it from the perspective of the hips need to snap back to realign. If you're doing molinete, on every side step that you do, forward, side, back, side. Always make the side step really, really clear, because a lot of the geometry that the leader is creating depends on you going where they're expecting. And side steps, there are so many of them when it comes to creating different sequences, that if you don't track that side step correctly, it messes up the leader and then messes up the connection. I'll leave you with this image that I think is really effective, that I got from many teachers that I've worked with in the past. And that's the image that your leg doesn't start at the hip, but it starts under your ribs. So right around your solar plexus, imagine that the leg actually starts from here. So when you're initiating your motion, whether to the front or the back, it's really happening from the point around your solar plexus that you're reaching the leg and transferring your weight and sort of powering your movement, that it's really happening from up high. That image really changed the way I danced, and what I noticed is that it actually helped me keep this part of my spine more in, which happens for followers that because we dance in close embrace, sometimes we get into this habit of really arching through the back, which actually shortens our stance and makes our movement a lot more truncated. So if you think about, okay, this is where your legs start, then keeping that part of the spine in the body will help you feel more grounded and balanced. So play with that idea. Let me know what other questions you might have about this particular topic, walking for followers, steps in different directions. If there's other issues that you're running into, pop those into the comments and let me know. Now, if this is your first time joining me and you've made it this far, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button because I post one of these every week on Saturdays, and I hope I see you next week. Ciao!